LectoraLive. I'm here with Joe Ganci. This is our pre-show show, if you will. We're just getting our stream going up live on YouTube, and then we are going to start the recording in about a minute, and that'll be up on Vimeo.com. If you want to find the shows there, it's Vimeo.com/channels/LectoraLive. All one word, LectoraLive. That's L-I-V-E. Well, today we've got with us Joe Ganci. He's an old friend. Well, he's not that old, but he's a friend, and he's been around the e-learning world quite a long time, which makes him, I guess, a senior in the e-learning world. And we're going to talk a little bit about Lectora today. Huh?
An elder.
An elder. I like that. Elder sounds good. He's an elder spokesman and statesman for the product. Mm-hmm. So we've got Lectora talk today. And we're going to talk about, you're going to talk about responsive today, right? And show a little bit?
Yeah, I thought it'd be fun to show a little bit of how responsive works in Lectora, because it's a new feature that not everyone has seen yet. And but I won't spend too much time in it. I just want to show the ropes, if you will, and then illustrate why it's such a cool concept and how useful it can be.
That sounds good. All right, let's get ready to do the show recording. If you want to put me on my single shot real quick. We're going to start the show recording in 3, 2, and 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome to LectoraLive, your inside track into Lectora. Let's get started. We are back. Well, today we've got with us Joe, not just any Joe. We've got eLearningJoe on, Joe Ganci. Joe, how are you?
Doing great. How are you doing, Rick?
I am doing great, and I'm glad you could make it with us today. And Joe and I have both been around for a long time. Joe was real big back in the authorware days. He has kept up on all the tools, and I don't think there's anything he's not into. He's quite venerably everywhere, and that makes Joe fun. But Joe also is quite adept at Lectora, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about responsive learning and some of the new things that Lectora has put into the program. And Joe, how did you ever get into e-learning back in the old days?
That's a good question, because it's really interesting how often people who come into this industry come from very disparate areas. And one of the best developers I ever had working for me had studied to be a chef, and he went to the Culinary Institute of America, and he graduated from there, and he actually was a chef for 10 years until he finally realized he was probably never going to earn enough money to make it worth his while, and he was never going to be one of the famous chefs on TV. So he went back to his second love, which was in essence learning. And so you just never know. I started in e-learning in college. I'm fluent in Italian, and so I was part of the Italian language groups on campus and studying actual Italian history and literature as well. I also was the editor of the Italian newsletter, where I interviewed people and so on, and printed it, went to the photocopy machine and printed it up. The photocopy machine was actually located in the faculty area. And I'd usually go in the evenings once a month there, and usually I would meet up with my friend Pierluigi, and as things were photocopying, he and I would just chat. And one of those times, again, it was in the evening after classes were over, and he asked me what did I think I was good at, and I said, geez, I love to write, and I love to teach, and I love to program computers. And unbeknownst to us, one of my Italian professors was still in his office, and he was sort of eavesdropping the whole time. And he came out and he said, Joe, I may have a job for you. Well, it turns out that on campus we had a computer lab that had learning stations in it. And the learning stations were dumb terminals tied to a mini computer in the back room, big computer lab type of place. It was actually pretty advanced for its time. a lot of people don't know that the first e-learning tool initiative started way back in 1960 when the National Science Foundation funded the creation of what eventually became known as Plato. And actually, it didn't take long before Plato started to really move through the industry. Then about 7 years later, they funded a second one, and that was called TICCIT, T-I-C-C-I-T, which stood for Time-Shared, Interactive, Computer-Controlled Information Television, and that was what we had. It was a ticket system. So that got me into, the professor asked me to create an Italian language teaching program, and it was a pretty sophisticated system for its time, while the rest of us were using the very first PCs in our homes with 4 colors or 16 colors.
Yep.
We had a choice of 4096.
Yep.
So, you know, that was the sort of thing. And that's how I got started. Following graduation and with my computer science degree, I went to work for Ford Aerospace and then other companies, and eventually I started my own practice in 1988.
That's cool. That's cool. And you know, 4096 actually would work well in today's day and age with zombies and vampires. That's about the color range you need. So pretty good.
Very good. Actually, it's very interesting because when I teach my classes, I often teach about colors and how on a computer you can have up to typically 16.7 million, right? Because you have 8 bits for red, green, and blue, and if you multiply those together, you get 16.7 million. But the human eye can usually, a very good human eye can usually distinguish only about 10 million shades. So colors, you know, well, a lot of them go to waste, I guess. You know,
well, no, that's sort of like the retina screens. If you think about it, they're 300 dpi or dots per inch or pixels per inch, and the human eye can't see really much past 300. So when you have all these 500 dot per inch or pixels per inch screens, they look really good, but you can't tell.
Right, good point. Yeah.
It's just fascinating. Yeah, it's fun stuff.
Yeah, the technology has now superseded our ability to distinguish the advances. So.
Isn't that amazing? So in the future, the robots will see for us, probably.
Ouch, yeah, true.
I bet you they could probably, well, they have sensors that can see the colors that we can't, or at least the gradations of color that we can't. It's pretty fascinating. And yet we can sort of tell when you have a really nice screen that there's something nicer about, a richness about it. But, you know, now when you got into e-learning, it was a different world. It was, I mean, you barely had monitors in those days. They were coming up, but they were, you know, limited, like you said. They didn't have great color range, and there were still a lot of green screen monitors back when. What kept you into e-learning? Because you've had a full career in the e-learning world with a lot of different tools. What do you see as some of the, let me change that. What do you see as some of the differences between today's e-learning and really what it was 20, 30 years ago when you first started?
Well, let's say 20 years ago, because that would have been in the 90s. And in actuality, you mentioned that I was an expert in authorware. Authorware was a tool that originally was created by Michael Allen, a very famous name in the industry, and he had a company that he called Authorware Incorporated, and it was out of Minneapolis. Eventually, that was sold to, well, actually, Authorware Incorporated and Macromind merged to become Macromedia, and eventually Macromedia then merged with Adobe, and so now it's called Adobe. However, Authorware, for all of its power, and it was very powerful, couldn't keep up with the web world. It just wasn't really ready for that, and it would have taken a lot of time to fix. Having said that, it was a very powerful application, and as such, there are still things that Authorware could do that we can't do now in our tools.
I agree.
Right. So, for instance, if I want to have the ability to have the learner record his or her own voice to compare to a native speaker's voice, if you're studying a language, for instance, not very easy to do in any tool right now. We have to actually program that separately, in essence. There are all sorts of things you could do in Authorware for branching that are more difficult to do now. However, having said that, obviously, the tool which lasted and really was number one in the industry from about 1988 to about 2005 it's now 11 years since it was last updated, and guess what? It's still being sold on the Adobe site.
Is it
Although,
really?
yeah, you can go buy it right now. But I don't necessarily recommend it if you're working on the web, because that's where, of course, modern tools have the huge advantage.
Right.
They are meant to be to use to create web-based applications. So, all in all, I would say that, in a way, and I'm going to, if you give me 1 minute on this is something I'm pretty passionate about. The tools actually don't matter as much as what we've seen happen in the industry. This is not the first time I'm saying this, and I know Michael Allen says something very similar, and I totally agree with him on this. We used to create, excuse me, let me get a drink here.
I know how you feel. I had a little bit of coffee before I came in. I go, never have coffee before a show.
Ah, well, it serves me right for eating frogs for breakfast. Now I have a frog in my throat. Excuse me, sorry about that. All right, so what I was saying was that back then we were creating much larger courses, much longer ones, and that's not necessarily a good thing at all, okay? I mean, we were creating courses that were sometimes 20, 30, 50, 70, 80 hours worth of seat time. Which is unheard of nowadays. It just doesn't happen anymore, and that is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, the fact that we are creating much more focused courses now, shorter as well. But what's been happening, that's not really the issue. The issue is that back then we had, because these courses were bigger, there was no way that 1 or 2 people could create a course on their own. There really had to be a large team of people, and that included instructional designers, that included developers who were more like programmers, if you will, and of course your media specialists and so on. We still have those. However, having said that, the designer was typically someone who was well trained in instructional design or technology. They had master's degrees, and many still do, in how to create learning on a computer. Then you had the developers who knew how to take a storyboard or prototype that may have been built and build on that to create the actual courseware on a computer, combining the media, the interactivity, all the things that were requested and required. Okay, so that was back then. Then what happened in the late 90s was vendors started to promote the idea that their tools were now easier to use, so easy in fact, that you really didn't need developers anymore. You know, not much anyway. You really just needed instructional designers who would work with the subject matter experts, get the content they needed, and then the tool itself was so easy to use, the instructional designer could actually use it to create the courseware and not just a storyboard. Okay, well, having said that, we had an issue. The issue was that instructional designers were not, the tools that they were using, first of all, were much more limited than what we had earlier. And they were so because instructional designers were usually not trained in programming or developing anything. They were, of course, the creative writers and visionaries who put together the courseware on paper or in PowerPoint or in Word that would then become the guide for the courseware itself to be built by the developers. Well, now the tools were simpler, and as such that meant they had fewer features, and as such that meant that we started getting more and more of the linear, non-interactive types of learning because of the fact that it was more difficult to set up branching and such, and they just weren't really ready for that. That just wasn't their thing. All right, so having said that, it wasn't so bad. It was bad, but not so bad. But then around 2007, something else occurred. Vendors now started promoting the idea of, hey, our tools are now so easy that you don't even need an instructional designer. You can have your subject matter expert directly use the tool to enter the content that they need to impart to the learner. Whoa, now we started seeing tons of really bad e-learning being created. Okay, really bad e-learning. Nothing but linear, next type of thing. And the question is why? Why was it? Was it the subject matter expert couldn't care? No, of course they cared. But if you think about it, A subject matter expert is typically someone who is, of course, an expert in their field, whatever that might be, and their organizations see them as experts, and then eventually they ask them to start training other people in their expertise. And so they start putting up classes in classrooms. The instructor gets in front of the classroom, typically has built a PowerPoint to use while teaching, and then the people who are sitting in the class are learning from the Grand Master. Well, then the organization says, hey, we just found out this e-learning thing can save us a ton of money and time. You don't have to be flying everywhere anymore. We can actually do this online. We're going to capture your expertise and make it, in essence, make you immortal. Okay, great, but what do the SMEs know? Did they know how to create good learning? No, they knew how to present in front of a classroom. And even then, they may not have been the best instructor, but at least they were able to get away with that pretty well. Now they were taking their PowerPoints and basically importing them into tools, prettying them up a little bit, adding a little voiceover, putting a quiz at the end. Done! Yeah! Okay, here we go. So, what do we got? We got a lot of bad e-learning out there. And why? Because the tools now have become, in essence, so simple that everyone is convinced that you really don't need real good instructional designers anymore. You don't really need developers anymore. And by the way, let's not forget, subject matter experts tend to be very busy people. They don't have the time to learn how to become good designers and developers because they're doing something important, whatever it is. So in the end, we're ending up with a lot of bad learning, which in the 90s was rarer because we had people who knew their disciplines and were able to apply their expertise in development or design, etc. It's not to say that there's not a lot of good e-learning being made right now, but there's less of that and more of the bad stuff being made.
And the budgets got smaller.
Yes.
The corporations, a lot of them just say, we just want to, we always talk about this on the show, check off training. We don't care if you learned anything. We just want to check off that we're indemnified. And unfortunately, that goes a long way to ruin good training too, because the interest isn't to actually teach someone, it's just to make sure that indemnification has occurred, and therefore, hey, we're safe. But that doesn't work either, because they're forgetting that lawyers will subpoena records, they'll look at performance, and then they go, no, you didn't do anything. This training is valueless. And
well, Rick, here's the thing. You're absolutely right, and usually it's extremely prevalent in compliancy training, right? Regulation type training. And yes, companies often don't seem to care that their learners may not be well versed in not sexually harassing or in not putting their hand near that acid, tub or whatever it might be that they're trying to. But the smart ones, of course, don't want sexual harassment happening, and they don't want their people getting their hands burned off by acid. So they don't necessarily go that route. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Please continue.
No, that was pretty much it. Those are some of the factors that are contributing to poor e-learning.
Yes.
Get it out fast. Basically check it off, and move on. Then nobody looks back. I remember back in the early days of the LMSs, let's say in the 90s, there was a lot more analytics going on then than there is today. Now some companies are pretty elevated. They're actually looking at the analytics. They're trying to figure out what can we do to make ourselves better. But I'd say those are few and far between.
Yes, you make an excellent point, and it actually ties into what you said earlier too, that many times they're just looking to see that their people have completed something and have passed the test because that indemnifies them. When you said that the lawyers can come back and say, well, the training was valueless, I think you were saying that they were seeing that perhaps people were failing or not passing the exam or whatever. And in that case, it may not be the case at all. I mean, they may very well have completed a course and passed it and learned absolutely nothing.
That's true.
That's true.
Right? And what they'll do sometimes is, you're right, on the remediation, was any given? So if you wind up down that legal rabbit hole, did they actually get remediated? In other words, if you fail the test and everything's still the same, what good was it? How do you make it better? And that, some companies are doing very good jobs at trying to make people better. A lot of them just do it because they have to, not because they want to. And then the others just say, hey, get it out quickly, make it look like we did something, and we're done.
Well, frankly, that's also because a lot of them have no clue that good learning can really help a company to grow and to avoid accidents and so on. So they don't know any better in many cases.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of my time educating new clients on, the whys and wherefores of learning because they don't know, and that's fine. They don't know. So the ones who are smart let themselves be taught what it means, and others don't. I'm going to borrow a story from a good friend of mine, and I believe yours as well, Glenn Bull, who lives in Christchurch, New Zealand, and I recommend him for a future talk interview, by the way. Except for the huge time difference. Glenn does very much what I and you do, but over in New Zealand right now. And he tells a story about how a company there hired him to evaluate their first e-learning effort that they had done in-house. And this is very often what I'm asked to do as well, so I was really able to relate to what he was talking about. He asked for the URL to the lesson ahead of time and reviewed it first, and then he went in to talk to them. Now, rather than the customer in this case asking him questions immediately, he started asking them questions, and he said, "Hey, let's talk about the length of the course. How long is this lesson?" And they said, "Well, it's about 17 minutes." And he said, "Yeah, that's right, because I went through and looked at everything in the lesson, and it took about 17 minutes to go through it." Great. How long did the average learner go through it? And they said, "We don't know." Well, what do you know? Well, we know that everybody completed it and everybody passed the test. And so we're happy about that. Oh, okay. So everybody completed, everybody passed the test. Now, let's get some more information out of the LMS. Let's see, how long did they take to go through it? Well, when they looked at it, they were shocked. The average learner took 2.6 minutes to go through a 17-minute lesson. And they said, "Well, how did that happen?" And he said, "Let me show you. Next, 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 right?" In the end, it was a revelation to them. But then they said, "You know what? But maybe everybody already knew the material, so they felt like they didn't really need to review it. After all, they did pass the test, so clearly they were already cognizant of the material." And he said, "Well, let's look at that too. There are 6 questions on the test, and you can take it as many times as you wish. Until you pass." So the average learner actually took the test 4 times until they passed. Well, again, they were really shocked. We spent $37,000 to create this. Now, that was a lot of money for a 17-minute lesson, but it was their first effort. You understand, they made mistakes, whatever. But the real revelation was just completing a course and passing a test does not mean you've learned a thing.
That's right.
All right, so yes, that's an issue.
That's true.
But let's go on. Oh, and by the way, one other thing I want to say, one of the things that does excite me now, and I've been looking for this sort of thing for a long time, is we have several tools out there now, and I just reviewed this morning, I got a demo of a new tool called Mobile Coach, which is one of several tools out there now that allow you to continue the discussion after a lesson is done. Whether it's classroom or whether it's online, that you're able to continue to prompt the learner, texting the phone or whatever it might be, to continue asking questions and keep the learner engaged and keep the learner remembering, what they learned. So even those who are not necessarily able to apply immediately what they learned, they're still keeping up to speed in essence. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing we have now.
Yeah, that's good. Now, today we were going to talk a little bit about responsive, the current buzzword. It's everywhere. Nobody really knows what it means, but it's fascinating, the different approaches that have been taken. Adobe took one approach, which I've seen really come out of Muse first. At least that's where I first saw it, was the Adobe Muse approach to mobile, which in essence you have the components just sort of rearranged, but you have to manually do a lot of it.
Yes,
Captivate does
do a lot of things automatically, but you do spend a lot of time manually doing things as well.
Right,
sure.
Right. Now, Lectora took a pretty interesting approach. They took a matrix approach that the matrix kind of folds in and off itself, and it's really rather fascinating the way they did it and the ease of moving it around, if you will. You were going to show a little bit of that today.
Sure. Yeah, let me do that. I'll go ahead and share my screen if I can. Share screens. And close a few things here. So I'm going to show you quickly using a blank file, and then I'll show you a finished file as well. So let me start my screen sharing. Now you should be seeing my screen here momentarily.
There we go.
Okay, so let me start by doing a new file. I'll close this one, and yeah, let's save that. And we're going to create a new responsive design one. We're going to go and say we want to create a new title, and this one's going to be a responsive title. This is a really nice
Joe,
layout.
your video turned off, or it's on a different screen. It just switched.
To switch to what?
We just see your picture.
Really? Oh, darn. Okay.
I think what might have happened. Do you have two monitors?
I have three monitors, actually.
Yeah. It's probably on the wrong one right now.
Okay.
Skype does that.
I've never had to do that. That's weird. Change screen sharing settings. Let's go back to...
I mind it. We don't mind looking at your pictures. You can do that, but...
Did that change?
Not yet.
All right, let me stop and then restart this.
Now, we notice that when there's 2 or 3 monitors, sometimes Skype gets confused.
Yeah, okay. Did it stop?
You're still showing your picture.
That's weird because I told it to stop sharing, and now I'm telling it to share screens again.
Oh, actually, turn your video back on. Maybe that's what happened. It turned off. Oh. There we go. Now we have your screen, and we have you again.
Okay, good.
Well, no, actually, we have your just screen, right? We have your screen now.
Okay. So this is the dialogue you see when you want to create a new project, and I really like how Lectora lays this out. It's very easy, simple to understand. So blank title, responsive title. Clearly, we're showing responsive today. Now, what is responsive? Let me illustrate that first by just illustrating to you the what it means to be responsive. If I were to go to almost any commercial website nowadays, you'll see how responsive works. If I go to Microsoft, for instance, the trick is simply that you want to see what the view would look like on different devices. Mm-hmm. And the simplest, easiest way to do that, it's not necessarily the most scientific way of doing it, but certainly it helps, is to be able to, for instance, say, okay, well, at the very widest portion of my screen, we see that the site looks like this. As I start to make this more narrow, as I start to change the resolution, at this moment, I'm just simply showing what it would look like on a desktop with a lower resolution. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's that. But at a certain point, it's going to switch over to a new view. Watch this now. And you see there's 4 things at the bottom, so let me go to 2. Mm-hmm. And now we're looking at basically the tablet version, right? So we have 2 on top of 2 rather than 4 side by side. Mm-hmm. If we go even more so to the point where we would be looking at this on a cell phone in portrait mode, now we have the 4 stacked on top of each other rather than, okay, so that's responsive. And every website now does this, although just a few months ago when I was teaching responsive for an organization, a lot of these sites were not responsive at all yet. So they're only jumping on board recently. The reason why this is such a cool thing is that you're not having to create a mobile version of your site separate from your desktop version. That's how it was done earlier, right? Right. And so now you can just create one and be done with it. So when you create a responsive title in Lectora, rather than having just one stage, in essence, you have 5 different viewports or views of that stage. And we start with the desktop one here in the middle, and that's always where we really want to do our work. But we also can see on the left-hand side, we have the portrait modes for both tablet and for cell. And you can see the screen is, the stage is changing what do you call it? Well, it's in portrait mode now. If I go back to desktop again, you'll see that the tablet desktop is very, very similar. In fact, it doesn't really change at all. But then the cell phone landscape mode is smaller. So what happens is that normally if I wanted to add something on the slide, okay, so let's say that I want to insert now a character on my slide. Okay, simple enough. I'm going to choose any old character here and bring it onto the slide. Usually, as you know, things go right in the middle of the stage when you insert something, and so now I can go look at it in tablet mode. That's what it will look like. Same exact thing as desktop in essence. Over here on the cell phone mode, oh, look at that. It actually shrunk in size to fit within the stage, so automatically Lectora did that for me. If I switch over to the portrait mode for tablet, I can see now, oh, this is interesting. Why is it doing this decrease my resolution a little bit so you can see it better. Why is it up there? Well, because what we're doing is we're showing the a different aspect ratio. Earlier, it was a stage that was cut off here below her feet, right there. But when we're extending the stage height-wise and not width-wise, well, what are we going to do with her? Okay, you can leave her where she is, of course, but maybe you want to redesign that. Also, for the portrait cell phone version or smartphone version, same kind of thing. So what do? Well, there's a few options here. First of all, let's say I want to put her right there. If I do that in desktop mode, the cool thing is that now in the other modes, it will have replicated my movement. See that? So now you'll see that all of them are over on the right-hand side because of what I just did. Mm-hmm. But let's take a look now here. I'm not in the desktop mode right now. I'm in the tablet landscape mode. If I move her in the tablet landscape mode, the desktop has not changed. However, this one has. These have not changed. What's happening is, you can see by the arrows up here, that things always move down, not up. Meaning that if we start here in the middle, you can think of this as going down one side of a hill or the other side of the hill. And this means that whatever you do here is going to apply to all views. But when I click here, notice that there's only a right arrow here, meaning it's only going to flow down to the view below, which is this one here. This one has no arrows, meaning that anything you do here will only happen at this level, will not change that, or any other level either. Okay? Now that's a huge part of this. And by the way, Captivate works very similarly in this respect, so it's not like it's completely different in any way. I just want to point out for those of you who do use Captivate that Lectora does things very similarly, so you'll feel right at home if you pick up Lectora and start using it. Okay, so having said that now, there's a few other things to note here. If I come back to the desktop mode and I move her over here, what do we expect to see? Well, let's look at the portrait mode here. All right, good, she's on the left. Over here, good, she's on the left. Looking over here, yeah, kinda. Over here, no. And the reason why this is kinda is because I had moved her over here on the left, but she's not quite all the way to the left as the other one is. See that? Meaning this is the simple explanation here is, if you make an explicit move, for instance, if I were to take her and move her down to here on this level here, well, let's not do that because we want to extend the height. If I move her here, that will not change any view where I had made an explicit change. Of course, if I make a change here, it would only apply here, but this one, I had moved it earlier. And if I take this now and move it even, make her smaller and so on, you'll see it does not affect the other. And if I take this and make her bigger, it will not affect this because I had made an explicit move. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of reminds me.
Only if I had not touched the other views and moved the object, will the object take on the parent's properties. However, if I decide that really this right here is where I want all the other views to be, I can right-click on this and then choose. Oops. Try that again. I want to right-click on that and choose to reset the overrides and remove this object's overrides in all views. Okay. If I do that, now you'll see that they are all at the same view. Okay. So there are ways around that.
Now, Joe, isn't that similar to the way Flash used to do instances?
In a way, yeah, because what you're talking about there is, you have instances of an object, and the object can, if you do something to the object, it would change the instances. True, but I don't want to muddy the waters. That really is a whole separate idea and issue, although, I can see whether you would see the similarity there. The difference is that this is really not these are not instances. There really are just one image in here.
Right.
Okay, period. Not instances of an image, because if I come here now at any of these views and I delete this image, like so, I'm going to hit delete now, and it says, hey, this is going to delete it from all device views in the title. Excellent warning, by the way, because you may think that you just don't want it at this level, but you don't want it on the portrait, portrait cell phone view, but by deleting it in any view, you're going to delete it everywhere. So what do you do if you don't want it in this view? There, put it off stage. That's it. Now she will not appear in that view at all. Okay, does that make sense? All right. Lastly, let me just point out one more thing here, and I think that's the only other one I really need to talk about here. Is there are times when you might take. Let's go back to make sure that all of the others are corresponding now. I just reset all the others and overrid them, so now you see that they're all back to the same location. I'm going to take her at the desktop view. Remember, the desktop view is where you're going to be spending most of your time, and I'm going to place her right there. That's where I want her. It's sort of a natural place for the mentor to be. I may make her just a slightly taller. That's fine. But if I look at it here, again, no big difference. If I look at it here, looks good there too. But again, in portrait mode, oops, what's happened is that it's located it relative to the top of my stage. From the top of my stage is actually the same amount. See that? But if I wanted to be tied, in essence, to the bottom of the stage or to the right, if I take this and move it to the middle here, I'm just going to put her, I'm just going to tie her to the, I want to tie her to the bottom now. What I can do then is to come to position and size, and right here, offset from bottom. And when I click on that, now all the other views will be having her at the bottom. By the same token, I can take her and put her, for instance, closer to the right side of the screen. Doesn't have to be exactly there, but closer to the right. And then once again, now I can come up here and click on offset from right, and now I'll see that she has moved to the right side and to the bottom as well. So that is how you really need that at times, because you can't count on having your image or your object at the bottom unless you choose that option, so that it knows that it needs to go to the bottom even when the aspect ratio is quite different. Okay?
Yep.
So I do have an example that I already have built that I can show you. Let me do that now. I will go into here. And this one here is a finished example. So this one kind of shows you, and I'm going to go ahead and show you first how it looks, and then you can, I'll show you. I'll answer any questions. Do you take questions, by the way? I forget.
We don't have any in the audience right now. There's no audience chat going on, I think.
Okay, that's fine. But I can also show some examples of how it was built. So if I preview this right now, it's on my other screen. Let me move it over. This is the desktop view, and if I were to take this and shrink it down as I did with the Microsoft site earlier, you'll see that at a certain point, look at that, he becomes full length, body length, and it's changed. And so as you see, things are getting smaller, but they're also having perhaps changing entirely, like from here going from full body length to waist up, like that. And that is done pretty easily because of what I just showed you. If I take a look at, for instance, that guy that I put on there, and he would be right over here, you'll see that at the desktop view, that's what I put. I put this guy here, and by the way, yeah, and if I go looking at this view, it's the same. I go look at this view, it's the same. Look at this view, what I did was I moved that one off stage and instead put the image of him full body there to make it look more natural in the slide. So all you got to do is move that one off and move the other one on in the different views, and boy, it doesn't get any simpler than that. So when it comes down to it, everything that is built here, and I really should have shown you more than I just did. Let me show that one more time. It doesn't take long to do this, so I'll just do it once again. And
it's actually a pretty elegant way to do development.
It is. It's certainly a lot easier than working with CSS files and JavaScript and so on.
Yep.
It makes it, especially for people who are in this industry and are not necessarily programmers and so on. So once again, on this slide, on this next page here, you'll see that it's changing, and notice that he's on the other side of the slide, stage this time. When I click start, I see this video playing, I see mentors, and watch as I make this wider, the positioning of the mentors changes, The buttons, the video, everything's changing. On a desktop view or tablet view, this is plenty big enough. But when you're looking at a video on a smartphone, it gets too small unless you do something like this and make it bigger at the top and then change your allocation of your other objects. Because here we do have some white space, and there's nothing wrong with white space. It helps to see the screen, but you don't have that luxury as much on the smartphone, although we are still using enough white space to make it nicely balanced. So it's all a question of making it so that it looks good in each view. And what Lectora has done is to give us the ability to create these kinds of responsive in a relatively easy way. You mentioned earlier the matrix idea, but the matrix doesn't limit you the same way that some of responsive design tools do, where you basically are limited to columns. Out of the different tools out there, I've never made it a secret to say there's only about 4 or 5 tools right now in the e-learning industry that lets us do responsive learning. And of them, Captivate was one of the first, and in fact it probably was the first well-known one, and it's still the most powerful in terms of the things you can do. But the things you can do above and beyond what I just showed you in Lectora are really rarely needed compared to what we've done here. So I think what Lectora has done is give us the absolutely important things and not necessarily everything that is possible to do, because in most cases you won't need to do those.
Right.
So I think right now Lectora has done a great job of balancing the needs of most e-learning professionals. Okay.
Sounded good.
All right, let me stop sharing and then we can continue talking if you wish. All right, so that screen, I believe, is
That will show
yours.
you, we're seeing your picture again.
But that's yours, not mine. That's on your side. I think you might be sharing your screen too, maybe? I don't know.
No,
Really? That's weird.
Yeah, if you turn your video back on, I think you should come back on.
Oh. Well, it was on, now it's off, now it's on again.
There it goes.
Ah, it just had to reset itself. Okay, sorry.
Sometimes when you share and then stop sharing, it turns everything off.
Yeah.
It's not perfect. Are you on a Mac or PC?
No, PC.
PC.
Sorry.
But that was good. That was a really good demo of responsive and some things to consider, and also the gotcha of don't delete the item. It's gonna go away.
Don't delete the item, and remember that even if right now you're not creating learning for mobile, you probably will be sometime in the near future.
Right.
Now, the nice thing is you could take the pages that you've built in a Lectora file and bring them into a new responsive one by pasting them in. You're just going to have a little bit more work to do because you have to, in essence, then look at each page in turn.
Right.
But rather than doing each page one by one, so it's just a matter of the same amount of time, really, except for the fact that if you're doing it from scratch and you are going to duplicate a page, because in essence it becomes a template at that point, you don't have to redo all of the changes that you had to do the first time.
Right.
So that's the good thing there.
That's really good.
So we got a few more minutes. What else can we talk about?
Well, that was good. That was good. And actually, what time is it? We're actually just about at the end of our time.
Oh, okay. I thought it was an
We're
hour.
actually
That's
doing
good.
shorter shows nowadays. Not often. We don't really hit that 30-minute limit too often. But I think we've been going for about 46. So we're doing really well. And then what we're going to do is make 2 shows out of this. We're going to have the show with everything, and then we're just going to pull out your tutorial by itself.
All right.
So
Great.
that way
Very good.
we'll get 2 shows, and that's always good. Give you a little bit more publicity on it.
2 for the price of
2
one.
for the price of a twofer. Wow. So Joe, where do you see learning going in the next? It's so hard to say 5 years. I mean, in the next year or 2,
it really
what do you
is.
see as a coming trend or things that may affect people just a little bit more in this industry?
In a way, in our country, we are seeing a big divide between those who believe one way or those who believe another in the area of politics especially. And I see similar things happening sometimes in the e-learning field. We have those who insist that, everything should be done one way, others who insist that everything, but we're nicer people, we tend to get along better, so
Yeah.
I don't see any kind of civil war coming in the e-learning industry. Instead, what I hope to see is that we're going to wake up and start to realize that we are wasting a lot of time and money in creating learning that isn't really helping everybody, and that we will be able to start creating it better. Having said that, I have in the works right now a design for a website that I believe will help a great deal, but I need a few months to finish it up. So we'll see. You'll probably want to interview me sometime in the fall about what I've done, because I think it's going to be very, very useful.
So the mystery continues.
Yes, exactly.
Now I'm curious. He hasn't talked about this before, so
Yes. Well, Rick, get me drunk sometime, I'll tell you. Okay? I'll come out to Camarillo.
Next time you're out here, or DevLearn, or are you going to the Training, Learning, and Development Conference? The new one with Brent Schlenker, Louis Malbus?
I'm supposed to talk to Luis and Brent today, and so hopefully I'll know today. I've also been invited to speak at the BAI conference, which is held in Chicago, which it's not exactly the same time, but it overlaps, and so it's being held in Chicago, and it's their first conference. BAI is a large organization that does learning stuff too.
Okay.
So we'll see, but it's interesting because a lot of times these conferences are being held at the same time. I just went through that with, I mentioned earlier to you before we started.
Yep.
So,
but there's a lot of conferences now. There's a lot.
I love San Diego, by the way. So.
Yeah, San Diego's hard to beat. It's pretty nice up there or down there.
Yeah. So to answer your question you asked, I guess the only thing I can say is we are using technologies in ways that we never could before, and I believe all we have to do is look at the newer technologies to see where we might be going, and then apply those technologies where needed. It's useless to say, oh, well, now we have the ability to do virtual reality much easier than in the past.
Yeah.
Let's do all e-learning that way. No. It makes sense in some instances and not others. You must always focus on who the learner is, what is needing to be taught to the learner, and of course what the context is for that as well. And then finally, based on that, you should determine what kind of media should I use, what kind of interactions should I use, and what should be the length of this, and do I need to have multiple language support, etc. If you don't do that, you stand the risk of creating something that will be a disaster. And I've seen this happen where, without asking the right questions at the beginning, a huge e-learning course that cost a ton of money was never used because they didn't need it. So, yeah, it's sad, but it happens a little too more often than we think. I think in the end, where I want to see us go is that we focus again on the learner, on the content, on the context, and then based on that, we are choosing the right design and the right tool to use for that design, rather than doing what many of us do now, which is to say, oh, I've been tasked to create this lesson, so I'm going to let me see what my tool is able to do for me so that I can give the very best experience to the learner. Sounds good, but it's the wrong question.
Right.
Because it's not what can the tool do for me, it's what's the best experience I can give the learner, and then based on that, what tools do I need to use to ensure that maybe my tool will do it great, but maybe it won't. And so I need to know that.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Well, Joe, it's as always a pleasure. I hope we run into each other one of these days in one of the shows. You'll probably be at DevLearn. You're usually there.
I'm definitely going to be at DevLearn.
So I'll see. We'll definitely see you there. That'll be fun. But maybe we'll catch at one of the other shows. But always a pleasure. Always a pleasure seeing you, and we shall see you soon again. And thanks for coming on and sharing the little tutorial. I think that was really good.
Good.
You know why? Because it shows how easy it can be.
Exactly.
And a lot of people are afraid to hear the word responsive. It's like, no. I don't
people do get scared, but it's really not.
It's not that bad. It's not that bad.
Like everything else, just go through the door and you'll find that the room is quite nice and comfortable.
Yep, that's right. Well, anyway, thanks for coming on, and for all you people watching the show, give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. And subscribe. We will be up on Vimeo a little bit later today, and you can always watch the live recordings, again, not quite so live, anytime you want on YouTube. So we'll see you next week. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks, Joe.
Bye bye now.
Bye.